this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today's guest understands leadership where it actually counts, under pressure, with real consequences, and with a team depending on you. Mark Fava is a former U.S. Navy officer who served as an Admiral's aide early in his career, a role that gave him a front row seat to high-stakes decision-making, disciplined teamwork, and leadership at the highest levels. He's now an accomplished attorney and the author of Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom, and Sea Stories for Leaders. What I really appreciate about Mark's work is that it's not theory, it's earned experience. Powerful sea stories and practical insights, he distills timeless lessons on teamwork, trust, preparation, and leading with clarity under pressure. His work bridges the gap between military precision and civilian leadership, offers leaders at every level a roadmap for building resilient teams and making sound decisions when it matters most. Mark, it's really great to interview a shipmate. Welcome to The Conversation.
Absolutely, Clint. You know, we both spent 6 years in the Navy, about the same time frame, so it's always fun to catch up with somebody else that served in that same time frame.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was pre-internet, and there was no, you didn't get email. You like the mail card to come on and bring your physical letters. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
everybody had an FPO or APO box, and you waited for mail call.
You did, and you'd hope. My wife used to number the letters so that I would make sure I read them in order, because I'd get 10 at a time. So you had to number them in case you wanted to keep the story straight.
Exactly.
So I like to think of all the people that come on the podcast as superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. And, what's yours? What made you from, I know your dad was in the military, but how did you get to where you are today, basically?
Sure. Yeah. As you said, Dad was a Navy captain, and, as most families, we moved around every couple of years. He was in the Supply Corps, but gosh, we had probably done 5 or 6 moves, including Guam, Hawaii, Washington, D.C., here in Charleston, and a couple other places by the time we got to high school. And that was in Charleston, South Carolina. And by then, Dad decided to settle down here. And that was, this became home. Came time for college. He said, if you want to go out of state, you got to get a scholarship. So, the options. It was Clemson or South Carolina at the time. You'd be from South Carolina also. But there was a Naval ROTC program up in Chapel Hill, and I really liked the commanding officer. The Naval ROTC program at South Carolina had a Marine colonel as the commanding officer, and I didn't think I was going to fit in very well there. So I went to Chapel Hill, did 6 years in the Navy as a naval flight officer at the height of the Cold War, in the back of a P-3 chasing Soviet submarines around the world. Became a legal officer in the squadron and really enjoyed that. And then the JAG said to me, hey, why don't you, if they ever think about becoming an Admiral's aide? My first tour was down in Jacksonville, Florida. And he said, why don't you, I said, where would I do that? He goes, up at the Admiral's headquarters in Brunswick, Maine. And I said, not only no, but hell no. I'm just, I'm a Southern boy. I'm in Jacksonville for a reason. I had just met.
How about Brunswick, Georgia? That might be better.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that the Brunswick you're talking about? Because I know there's good food there. And I ended up going there, and it was the best tour of my life, because I worked for an incredible leader. I learned things that were banging around in my head for 35 years. I went to law school back at South Carolina and stayed in the reserves for another 24 years. But the book is really something that I wrote because I was, as you mentioned, I was doing these things and had these habits, and they all originated from that, 18, 19 months when I was an Admiral's aide.
Yeah, I can understand the whole Marine Corps thing, because right in between high school and joining the Navy, I joined at 18 as well. But when I worked for my dad on Paris Island, actually, he was he was a contractor. We had the contract for steam. And so I remember being up in the bucket truck and working on the steam lines up in the air, and I'm watching the drill instructors run backwards faster than the other guys could run forwards. And when there's nobody around, hey, they would practice and yell and scream. And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing, but it ain't that.
Right. Well, that was the same. We did the obligatory college tour with my dad. We were going to go to South Carolina, Chapel Hill, then to your master's place, to Duke. And then I think it was Vandy and Georgia Tech were next. And when we got to South Carolina, the CO was the Marine colonel. He says, we have a different attitude here. Everybody stands watch. You wear, rather than wearing the uniform once a week, you wear it 3 times a week. And I'm like, oh, God, if I'd want that, I'd go to the Academy or the Citadel. Nothing against those schools. They're excellent schools. That wasn't what I was looking for in the the CO at Chapel Hill was just the opposite. One time a week, you can join a fraternity, you can do whatever you want to do once you enjoy campus experience. And I looked at Dad, said, we don't need to go anywhere else. This is where I want to go. And ironically, the person that gave me the tour of the Chapel Hill campus was the Marine gunny, who I ended up befriending very well. And in spite of his efforts for 4 years to make me a Marine, we were great friends.
So it's funny. I got a personal story, but I roomed the person at I was married, and so I didn't stay on base. I lived off campus or off base, and the guy next to me was Dave Marriott. He's like related 15th cousin or whatever to the Marriott family.
Yeah.
But he was a Marine, and I guess I should say he is a Marine because they're
right. Never not.
So we would we'd carpool to the Bay Norfolk Naval Station a lot, NOB, and he told me one day, he says, how come, he says, you're the most squared away sailor I ever met. Why don't you join the Marines? He says, I actually put in a transfer to try to join the Marines and I wasn't allowed, which brings up another story. This is not my story, but I love this story. So one of the guys that works for us is Rocky Rossiker. He's a retired Marine. He did, I think he puts it 20 years and 20 minutes in the Marine Corps and retired. But he was interviewing to sit on Senator McCain's staff. And so he goes in and Senator McCain gets introduced and McCain goes, Marine Corps, huh? He says, I was going to join the Marines. And then they found out my parents were actually married. And so everybody's yucking it up and laughing. And Rocky says, Senator, I've heard a lot of Navy guys say they almost joined the Marines. I never heard a Marine say they almost joined the Navy. And Senator McCain says,
that's so true.
This man.
Well, this same gunny, I'm a freshman, and he would call me in every week after drill and make me stand in front of his desk at parade rest watching motivational films. So he'd have the old projector on there, and he'd start something going to be like the sands of Iwo Jima.
I can still hear the noise.
And then he would yell at me after about 20 minutes and said, have you come to your senses yet? And I said, no, gunny, get the hell out of my office, And then the next week I came in and, if you were Navy option, you had a black name tag. If you were Marine option, you had a red name tag. And Lord forbid I come in his office and on the desk was a red name tag that said Fava. And he says, it's yours for the taking. I said, I'm not there, gunny. Then come to attention and watch another motivational film. So, we became best friends, but I never came to my senses.
Awesome. This is your first book. What inspired you to write it?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing. And, that sort of led me to law school. So needless to say, as a litigator and as a lawyer, you're always writing. And it was, there was so much bad to come out of COVID. There was some good to come out of COVID, a lot of time and self-reflection. And that's what I decided when I decided to do it. I never watched a lot of TV before. I started watching stupid shows like Schitt's Creek and Netflix and, and this is a waste of time. So I actually had, 5 or 10 pages of notes somewhere in a folder that were probably 15 or 20 years old or older from this time that I'd taken. And I just turned those into the book. It took about 2 years to write, and that was it. The other thing is I've been telling my daughters these stories for 3 years, including stories about the Marines and being lost on a ship. And they finally said, Dad, we've already heard that a bunch, so why don't you just put it in a book? I said, okay. So that's what I did. And it was a bucket list item. So it was just really great to see. And you, having been through the process, knows, you reach that pinnacle and you're like, I can't do this anymore. And then when you finally start seeing the PDF layout and the cover, it starts to get real. And they ship you the first box of books and you're like, okay, I've done it. It's really neat.
Well, for those who aren't well-versed in the Navy hierarchy or Navy ranks, where does an admiral fall in that for the listeners who maybe don't know about that?
Sure. So we've got our enlisted ranks with the senior of those being, as you mentioned, E1 through E4, 5, and then you've got chief, senior chief, and master chief. In the Navy, then you have the officer ranks. The ensign is the beginning, then you go up lieutenant, JG, lieutenant commander, and then captain, and then admiral. So, and captain in the Navy is the equivalent in the Marines is colonel, and the same it's an 06 in the Air Force and the Army. So the admiral is what we would call the first flag rank, often called a general in the Army and definitely in the Marine Corps. And there's, the stars go up 1 through 4 or 5, I guess.
And sometimes there's a Commodore. Is there still a Commodore anymore?
Yeah, Commodore can be a senior captain that, would be called the Commodore because the position is such that they're over, a group of ships or, When I was in the P3 community, same thing. We had 6 squadrons, and the captain was called the Commodore because he was the captain over those 6 squadrons.
Then you got that gray area between enlisted and officers called chief warrant officers. We won't go there. That's a whole nother.
Yeah, very good leaders. Very smart. Yeah.
So as an admiral's aide, what exactly was your role? What did you do?
Yeah. I talk a lot about that in the book. And again, your number one responsibility was to make sure that the admiral's day from the beginning to the end, it was executed flawlessly, right? And that meant something maybe as trivial as, making sure they got a ride on time or making sure they got to point A to point B on time, which wasn't trivial, but helping with speeches, going to meetings with them. Something as simple as we're getting ready to walk into a room and meet somebody who I know he met 6 months ago. And as we're walking, I would just say, Admiral, you met Captain Jones 6 weeks ago. Remember his wife's name is Janie, blah, blah, blah. And he'd walk right up and, hey, Captain, hey, how you been? It's been about 6 weeks since we saw each other. How's your wife Janie doing or something? I mean, that's it. To the extent you can make their lives, which are incredibly hectic, better, and the execution of what they want to do more flawless, that's what you do. And it was phenomenal because I say this in the book. When I got the job, he said, you're going to do some things that are well below your pay grade, aren't going to be fun. You're going to do some things that are well above your pay grade. Because I was just a lieutenant, right? I'd only been in four years. And on the staff, everybody outranked me. But he said, I need you to do both equally well. So, do the crappy job well, do the high visibility job well. No difference as far as he was concerned.
So I imagine, since that role has some importance to it, that it's probably reserved for people with bright futures, and you must have demonstrated some high potential to get nominated for that position. What early experiences really shaped your approach to leadership, even before you became an officer?
Yeah. Gosh, I think clearly my book is dedicated to my mom and dad. So clearly, the work ethic of my parents, the integrity, the faith of them, and then the ability not to accept a door that closes to you, right? And that was really it. And then the old hit the deck running. So even before the Admiral told me to do the crappy job as well, when I got to my first squadron in Jacksonville as a lieutenant junior grade, all my buddies got, you're going to be a division officer in the maintenance, you're going to be an assistant ops, you're going to be this, that, and the other, and they had to lead troops. And they looked at me and said, Mark, you're going to be the navigations, logs, and records officer. I said, what's that? They said, all you got to do is take care of the chart room and then make sure everybody's flight time gets put in their logs. And they said, right now it's a mess. We're behind. The chart room's terrible. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I went to college and got a degree and got wings to go do this. But I turned it into with the help of a chief, I turned it into the best chart room in the hangar. We updated everything. We had an up-to-date inventory. Charts that were out of date, which were not good, were updated. Everybody's log books were then accurate. And that's a big deal for the pilots, not as big for the naval flight officers. And that was it. I mean, just that hit the deck running very early on, established a reputation that carried me through the next 3 years of the squadron. And I tell people that all the time. Boy, you come out strong early, that's what people remember. You come out poor as a doofus early, it's very difficult to recover.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't tell this in my son here because he's a senior in high school. He's going to go to Auburn in the fall. But I did that at Georgia Tech. So basically when I got there, I was an older student, having been in the Navy for 6 years first. But most people, they don't do well their first couple of semesters, and then they spend the rest of their academic career trying to get their GPA back up.
Right.
The opposite. My first, we were on the quarter system. I think after my first year, I had a 3.9.
Wow. Now,
what I did was I wrote that down to have fun later when all the hard classes happened. I was able to go still have fun. But I'd highly recommend if you're a freshman, work hard the first year.
Yes.
You should work hard all 4 years.
Absolutely. Same advice for this, for graduate school and for law school. First year, when I talk to law students or mentor them, they say, what's the most important thing? I said, look, I hate to say this, the most important thing is your academics. You can go do student bar, you can go play sports, intramural sports. You can do this. You can go to the Carolina game on the weekend. I said, but let me tell you something. If you don't finish strong out of the box, it's not good. And I was the opposite of you. I've always been a 3.2 sailor. So, I started around the 3.0. And then if I could just build it up, by second or third year in law school to a 3.2, 3.3, it was good. But, in law school today, that first semester, and I'm sure it's the same in graduate school, sets you up for an internship, which, you get in with a good firm or a good company that very early on, you're done. I mean, it sets everything up to roll for the next 2 years.
Yeah, it really does. Those first impressions really carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Now, there's a new term for me. I'd never heard of in 6 years in the Navy, but that's probably because I was I was in the bowels of the boat as an E4, down in the boiler room running a switchboard. But the Admiral referred to you as the loop. What is the loop? What does that mean?
Yes. Aviators all have nicknames or call signs, not as much in the P3 community as those our friends and jet jocks on the carriers. They all have call signs. But, the nice thing about being an aide is even though you might be the most junior person, you're always wearing a gold braid, the aiguillette. The more Admiral's stars you represent, the higher the Admiral is, the thicker that thing is. So I was with a 1-star, soon to be 2-star Admiral. It was just a double rope that was worn on the left shoulder. As you get higher, Chief Naval Operations, aide to the President, those things are pretty big, and you can tell it's a wonderful visual. So, he would call me the Loop. That was it, because he always had a Loop. Hey, Loop, come here. Loop, do this. Loop, do that. And that was a term of affection. As long as he was saying the Loop, things were good. Sort of like being a parent. As soon as he changed to, Lieutenant Fava, get in here, I knew something was going sideways. But so the Loop was the affectionate name he gave me in a term of endearment, much like, we would say on a ship, shipmate, and he called people shipmate too.
Yeah. So, I love the stories, by the way, there. I'm a storyteller myself, and I really enjoyed reading all the different stories that you told.
Thank you.
And I know that obviously all the lessons you put in the book have some are impactful, or they wouldn't have been included. But was there like one at the top of your list that was really the most formative lesson you learned from him?
Yeah, not to be a spoiler, but it was the last chapter, right? So I was, as you had mentioned, I was very lucky. Competitively, I came out of the squadron ranked number one of an officer award room of 60. And that was just, it was a lot of hard work. And that allowed me to become then the aide. And then about a year and a half into it, it was a 2-year position, about a year and a half into it, the Admiral got picked up for a 2nd star. And he said, listen, I'm going to Norfolk. I'm going to go be the head Admiral in Norfolk, which at the time was a 2-star. So the head of the base, the world's largest naval base at that time, was him. And he said, I'd love for you to go with me. And I talk about that, and I won't go through the whole thing, but at the end of the book, it was the most difficult decision. And because back then, Clint, if an aide who was the prima donna, the best of the best for the Admiral, then decides he or she is getting out of the Navy, it's not good. It's not a good signal for his or her retention. And the way he handled that decision, because I thought I was going to get fired, showed me and taught me how you handle people and be a good leader.
Yeah, he did that several places, and I was going to get to this question later, but one of the things he did that I really liked and that I try to do with people on my team is if there was any mistakes made, he took the hit.
Yeah.
And if there was good praise, he deflected it to you.
Yes.
And of course, you tell the story about how you also deflected it down to the person who actually wrote the speech, the PAO or POA. Anyway, the person who actually wrote the speech. And that's what I try to do. Is, to me, the leader is supposed to take the hit, but then pass the praise on to the people behind.
Yeah, it's a very simple philosophy, because when you do that, people really appreciate what you're doing, and they understand you're being humble. So to your point, someone would come up to the Admiral, and I did write most of his speeches, although he edited every single one of them with a red pen. And they would compliment him, and he would just say, well, thank you. And I'd be standing right next to him because I'm scrambling, taking his sword or taking his gloves or doing some aid stuff. And he'd just say, Loop here did it. And, okay, well, you didn't have to say that. He could have just said, thank you. I worked very hard on that. And so I think that's critical, and it transfers into the corporate world too, and also at the law firm.
I also appreciate how open you were, because according to you made a lot of mistakes. And he let you stay on as the Loop. He didn't fire you like he did one of his earlier ones. But, I think my favorite lines are when he called you in and say, don't let that happen again.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
He had a wonderful way of chewing me out where he never raised his voice and he never used profanity. I mean, I would know I was in trouble, and I would know I had screwed up, so to speak. And he would see the sweat beads on my forehead or the pits in my khaki uniform. And he would laugh, and he would say, I'm not going to fire you today. But then he'd look at me and say, don't ever let that happen again. And that's all he had to say. I got it, and it didn't happen again. And I just would lodge that in my list of things of my checklist of things personally that I had to do and make sure it didn't happen again.
Yeah, I think that everybody's entitled to make mistakes. And when people make the same mistake more than once, and I start to get frustrated because, we've had this talk and you did it again.
Right. Right. And that's what happened with his first aide. There were multiple times where he would tell him something. He would say, "Sir, yes, sir." And then 3 days later it would happen again. And, the Admiral finally looked at him and said, "Look, you're not having a good time and I'm not having a good time. So why don't we end this relationship?" And the young man said, "Yes, sir."
But that guy did pretty well afterwards,
He did
right?
very
If I
well.
recall. Yeah.
He was not cut out to be an aide. I just was fortunate that I was. But, and again, to the Admiral's credit, he said, this was a young pilot. He said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "Sir, I've always wanted to be an instructor pilot." He was a phenomenal pilot. He just wasn't a good aide. And you think that those skills would be transferable because it's execution and under pressure. He went on to be one of the best instructors in Kingsville, Texas, teaching young pilots how to fly. He just didn't have to worry about the Admiral's uniform and getting them from point A to point B. He did that with a plane instead.
Or maybe not having a helo pad on the ship he's going to visit and needing to get lowered. That was
Not
funny.
good. Attention to detail.
Yeah. Not good in your dress whites at all.
No, sir.
So, when you're young into the role, you're a lieutenant. How do you build rapport and credibility with the people that are superior to you?
Sure.
And I know you can always call on the loop and kind of leverage that, but even without the loop, how do you build credibility in peers or credibility with your peers and superiors, especially when you're young?
Yeah. I just, my current boss at work, who I've worked with for many years, he calls that thread and the needle, right? How do you, especially on a staff as the aide, when you are the youngest person, transfer that to, a law firm where you're the most junior associate, how do you build that credibility? And I think it's just by demonstrating basic skills, the first of which is you listen for the first couple of months. You don't come in as a know-it-all, right? And then you help other people. So on the staff, if I knew somebody was going to be out for the day or somebody had a conflict and the Admiral said, "Where's Commander Jones?" And if I knew Commander Jones was out, I would just say, "Look, Admiral, he told me he's going to be out this afternoon, but I'd be happy to get in touch with him." And then I'd go to Commander Jones. I'd say, "Look, the boss is looking for you. I don't think it's that important that you got to leave your daughter's dance recital, but here's what he wants." And so instantly they say, "Hey, you know what? He's helped me. I'm going to help him." And, 3 weeks later, Commander Jones would run around and say, "Hey, I saw the pitch, the brief that you were putting together with the Admiral. Slide 6 is wrong. You've got a misspelling." I said, "Oh gosh. Okay." And that's how you build that credibility and rapport with somebody, even when they outrank you.
Right. I love the story about missing page 12 in the binder in the speech. So don't let that happen again. That was another one of those.
And it's funny because that is a habit again that I carry through even today, and especially not as much today because everything's electronic. But sure, if you're scanning something electronically, or better yet, you're sending out a PDF. Back in the old days, it was the same thing. It was photocopy machines or delivering a pleading to the court. Always checked that, and that's just attention to detail.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that one later as well, but that's another one of those core principles that maybe you can attribute to the Navy, but it's certainly something that has helped me in my career. When we do project management and we do plans and we print Gantt charts to give to the team, back in the day when you would print them and not actually have PDFs, I have had to cancel, move a flight to a Saturday because I wasn't going to make it because I found a mistake in the Gantt chart and I needed to stay another 3 hours and reprint it.
Right.
And that's just, to me, that was, first of all, you have to be able to see the problem. Most people just print it and hand it over and they're gone, but you have to go through and say, is page 12 actually there or not?
Right.
And then you realize you've got to misprint, you've got to do it over. But to me, that was just the job.
Yeah. I mean, in your world, that was it, right? In my world, it was legal pleadings. Today, it's the same thing. It's presentations. And if you present something that's the worst thing, I hate when I send out a document and I catch a typo afterwards. So, have a great executive assistant, have somebody look at it, check it and double check it. After you've worked on it 10 times, you might not even see your own mistake. But remember, whatever work product you produce is a reflection of you. And for the Admiral, it had to be excellent. As an engineer or as a project manager, you got to be right. You can make a mistake, but nothing sloppy. And today, Even when I see court pleadings and there's a misspelling or something wrong in them, I immediately roll my eyes and say, I don't want to know how much you were charging an hour and you've got a misspelling in a document. Come on.
You do know they make spell check, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have improper grammar, but at least have spell check.
Right. I mean, if it's underlined or highlighted in Word, there's a reason for that.
Now, early in the book, it might have been one of the first lessons you had, but it says it's really important to understand what your boss's expectations of you are. Yeah. And when I think about that from a project management perspective, one of the things that's important is clarity, right? Clarity is your friend, and knowing what the expectations are, what, in our case, what the project's supposed to deliver, but in your case, is what your boss's expectations are. And you also said that behind closed doors, he allowed you to speak freely, but then once you left the room, your position had to be his position, and that was a united front. And in the service, I can make the argument that's a little easier because of the rank structure, and you will do as I do as long as I'm above you in the hierarchy. But when you get into the corporate world, what does alignment really look like in practice? I mean, not agreement necessarily, but at least operational alignment. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not as rigid as the military, but I still think there's a sense of unity. Even in my current employer, we've got a mission statement. We've got, I've got a card that hangs on the back of my ID lanyard that talks about the values of the company. And guess what? The CEO's all-team meeting a couple weeks ago, he starts with that chart. That here are the values. Here's what we aspire to be and how we aspire to treat people. And I think operationally, again, you should always allow people the license to disagree diplomatically, but you got to be aware of the context within which you're doing it, right? So I might be listening to a meeting, maybe another vice president is pitching, and I hear him or her say something that, I just grimace. It might not be the time to come right out of the meeting and disagree, right? It might be better diplomatically offline to say, hey, we should probably talk about this. But you've got to decide if it is the time, to say it in the meeting and how you're going to say it. And I think so many people lose that ability to, as I said earlier, thread the needle without throwing somebody under the bus, right? Nobody likes to be publicly humiliated or publicly shamed. At that same time, you're not in the position to be a yes man. You're just not. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to speak your mind and the truth and maintain your integrity. So, I think operationally, that's sort of how it has transferred.
Again, I put things in my context because my day job is running projects. And, we have to start off with a thing called the project charter, which is where we agree on the scope of the project.
Yes.
And one of the things we try to preach in that session is, listen, if you have a disagreement, now is the time. Because when we leave this room, so I like to say that maybe, Mark, maybe you're a super stubborn person and I'm super stubborn and you think we should go north and I think we should go south. And we're neither one of us are going to come off of our opinion. We both are invested in it, right?
Right.
But what we talk about is if the rest of the team agrees with you that we should go north, then what I will do as a team member is I will agree to help you move in the wrong direction because you didn't change my mind. I still think we should be going south, but I will support you in moving north. It's kind of like what the Admiral did was we can disagree behind the doors when we leave. You got to push my point.
Yeah, and to the point that, I got it. But he would give me the open audience to disagree behind closed doors, and he would listen to me. I mean, and some people don't ever, give people that amount of license. He said, and I remember very clearly, don't let me do anything stupid because you're the only one as in the room who will probably say you can't or shouldn't do that because everybody else is very high ranking. They might be a little bit afraid of speaking up and disagreeing with him. And he allowed me that complete license to check him behind closed doors, which I thought was, absolutely wonderful.
How do you walk that line between healthy dissent and destructive dissent, on a team? How do you manage that?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to the timing and the delivery, right? I mean, I never tell somebody I think they're messed up in an email because, gosh, and people do that all the time. I mean, it's just the wrong mechanism for delivery. The better thing to do is pick up the phone. No one likes to pick up the phone anymore. Matter of fact, we don't even have phones in our offices anymore. We don't have landlines. You're lucky. You get a text and, you talk about your son. I'll rat on my daughters. I'll say, you got to pick up the phone and call the office if you want an appointment. Well, I texted them or I did this. So you got to figure out the form to communicate it within. And if it's adverse, I've always found that voice-to-voice communication is good. Face-to-face is best because the delivery is critically important. The context of an email can be very easily misunderstood and misread, depending on the tone the reader puts into it as opposed to the tone the writer had intended to put into it.
Yeah, for those of you who've listened to the podcast, you probably heard this story before, but to me, it's like playing telephone when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And the first kid has, if you don't know the game, the first kid has a secret that he whispers to the second kid, who then whispers on to the third and on down the line. And of course, the fun of that game is that what the last person says the secret is not remotely close to what the secret actually started off being.
Right.
And that's what makes the game fun. Well, the problem is that still happens in the business world, except it's not fun.
Right.
And a leader stands up and says what he believes or she believes to be a very clear message, because in their mind it's crystal clear, right? Yep. And I'm reminded of Jack Nicholson on A Few Good Men. Is it clear? Crystal. It's crystal clear because I had the idea, so I'm communicating, and then I'm upset when what I think is a very clear direction doesn't get followed. And when I was writing my second book, I learned there's a difference between communication and conversation.
Yeah.
And when you're having those one-way dialogues, you are communicating. But now, to your point, I'm hearing the message through the way that I define terms, through my filters, through my biases, and frankly, whether I'm having a bad day or not. Right. I mean, how many times have you read an email, slept on it, and the next day you're like, okay, I don't know what I was thinking. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
And so we have to have a conversation, like to your point. Pick up the phone, have a conversation, and call the person and say, hey, what did you mean by this? And here's what I'm doing. Is this what you want? Is it right? But people don't want to do that. They want to check it off their list and just do a text or do a post on Slack and be done, when they should have a conversation.
Yeah. Listen, and I learned my lesson as a hothead litigator. I know you're from Atlanta, so I had this case for a major air carrier in the Southeast. It's a law firm. And it involved a passenger, a disabled passenger who was covered by the ADA, and the air carrier had made a mistake resulting in the injury of the passenger. And it was just an honest mistake, but obviously we were sued for negligence, and it was not a good story because there was some allegations that there were failure to follow policies and procedures about, lifting the passenger and doing this and belting them and gosh, I drew a lawyer on the other side that was just one of the most aggressive, hard-nosed jerks as a plaintiff's attorney. And I've got a lot of friends that are that way, and they're great people. And we were duking it out, and we were fighting over some document production. And same thing, late one Friday afternoon, to your point, it'd been a bad day. I was tired. He was demanding more documents. And I said, I got on the phone with him. I said, you're not getting any more. And then he sent me another email, and finally I wrote an email saying, you're not getting any more damn documents. If you want anything else from me, take it up with the judge. Hit send. I felt so great about myself. Went home, had dinner with my family. Then I started thinking, I don't know if I should have done that. Monday morning, walk into the office at 07 a.m. It was back in the days of the old fax machine, and rolling off the fax machine was like 20 pages of documents. And that's what it was. He had filed it. He's getting ready to, he said, Mark, if you'd like to discuss this, it'll be filed with the court at 9 a.m. And it was an affidavit saying, that I was not operating in good faith. I think I might have even cussed at him on the phone, which was not good at all. And then he attached it. That was his affidavit, was Exhibit A. The email was Exhibit B, where I said, take it up with the judge. And it was a motion for sanctions and a motion to compel. And he said, he'd give me till 9 o'clock before he filed it with the judge. Just picked up the phone, immediately called him, and wondering, he picks up, he goes, hey, Mark, I thought I'd hear from you this morning. I said, all right, I'm sorry. But in the heat of passion, when things weren't going well, when I was in a bad mood, to your point, that communication was improper.
It feels good at the time, but boy,
it felt great when I hit send. Didn't feel great when I saw the facts and I picked it up and said motion to compel and for sanctions, because the sanctions would be against me as a lawyer because I had failed to comply with the ethical rule of negotiating in good faith.
It's like when you win an argument with your wife and you walk away, well, that one, no, it did not. It did not go well. You won the war, a battle, but you lost the war, my friend.
Pick your battles.
That concludes part one of my conversation with Mark Fava, former U.S. Navy officer, accomplished aviation attorney, and author of Lessons from the Admiral. Coming up in part two, Mark talks about the role transparency plays in building trust as a team leader.
I talk sometimes about this, about, selling the proverbial, caca sandwich. You don't want to do it. We have to do it. And this typically was in the military. It's something nobody wants to do. To stand up there and say, this is a great thing, and, we're all going to be happy to do this. I remember standing up one time in front of the squadron at an all-hands meeting, everybody, 350 people, I was a reserve commanding officer, everybody was complaining about something that we were having to do. And I just stood up and I acknowledged it. I said, listen, this is not comfortable. I don't want to do it, but we've been given orders to do it. And this is how we're going to do it. And, you got about 24 more hours to complain and then it's over. I don't want to hear any more complaining because we're going to execute, and that was after, weeks of complaining. But I think people immediately understood, look, I agreed. It wasn't ideal. It's not the path we or I would have picked, but it was the path we were directed to go down. We might not know all the reasons why, but okay, no one likes the constant complainer. And then what that does to morale across the unit when everybody's always complaining. Every drill weekend in the reserves, you show up and people are complaining. You're like, oh God, why am I even here? So I think that transparency is critically important, not only with, hey, time to put up or shut up, but also with, hey, I know this isn't the best thing since sliced bread and we don't want to do it, but we're going to do it.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.